The acceptance letter had arrived in November. Early decision. The envelope from Whitmore University had come on a Thursday, which was also the day of his last regular season game before playoffs, and his mother had driven to the school to hand it to him at the gym entrance, rather than leave it at home for him to open alone. She had waited outside the gym in the parking lot in her car for 40 minutes because she understood that some things should not be opened alone, and that she was not going to be the kind of mother who let her son open an early decision letter by himself on a gym bench with his cleats still on. His name was Darius Leon Okafor. He was 17 years old. He was a junior at Harrington High School in Westmont, Georgia. He had a 3.9 grade point average. He was on the honor roll in 4 consecutive marking periods and had been on the honor roll every marking period since he started high school. He played point guard on the varsity basketball team, which was going to the regional playoffs for the 2nd consecutive year, partly because of the way he distributed the ball and the specific efficient, unshowy quality of his game, which his coach described to people who asked as he makes everyone else better without needing to be the one who scores. He was also the youngest volunteer youth basketball coach at the Westmont Community Center, having started in the summer before his sophomore year, when the center's director had asked if any of the high school players wanted to help with the 12 and under program on Saturday mornings. He had said yes. He had shown up the following Saturday at 8 a.m. He had shown up every Saturday since except for 2. One when he had a regional playoff game that morning, and one when his grandmother had visited from Nigeria and his mother had asked him to spend the morning with her, which was a request he had honored without complaint. The 12 and under kids at the community center knew him as Coach D. They were 11 and 12 years old, and they played basketball with the specific organized chaos that 11 and 12-year-olds bring to organized sports. Sometimes brilliant, sometimes inexplicable, always trying. He had learned across 18 months of Saturday mornings how to calibrate his expectations for that age and how to teach to the gap between where they were and where they could be without making the gap feel discouraging. He had learned that the most important thing he could teach them was not the game. It was the experience of working at something with discipline and seeing it improve. The game was the context. The lesson was the work. He had told his coach this once. His coach had looked at him for a moment and said, "You are going to be a very good teacher." He was by any measure available to him and to the people who knew him, a young man in the process of becoming exactly the person he intended to be, careful, consistent, generous with what he was building, and about to leave Westmont for a university that had seen the grade point average and the test scores and the recommendation letters from his basketball coach, from his AP history teacher, and from the community center director who had written 2 paragraphs specifically about the Saturday morning program and what Darius had built with it, and had said yes in November before the spring deadline, in an envelope his mother drove to the gym to hand to him. He had not opened it in front of her. He had put it in his bag and said, "Mom, I'll open it when we get home." She had said, "You are too composed for a 17-year-old. He had said, "Coach says the best plays look easy." She had laughed. They had driven home. His mother had spent the drive with her hands at 10 and 2 and her eyes on the road, and he had sat in the passenger seat and held his bag on his lap with the envelope in it and thought about what it might say. He had thought, if it says no, I will apply regular decision to the other schools, and one of them will say yes. He had thought, if it says yes, I am going to say yes back. He had thought, either way, the work I did is already done, and it was worth doing. And this letter doesn't change whether it was worth doing. He was 17 years old. His parents had not given him the capacity for clear thinking, which is something you have or you do not. They had given him the practice of applying it even when the stakes were high enough to make it difficult. He had opened the letter at the kitchen table with his mother across from him and his younger sister, Chinelo, who was 14 and who had pretended to be doing her homework, and who was clearly paying total attention with the flat, unsentimental attention that younger siblings often bring to moments about older ones. The letter said, "Congratulations, we are pleased to offer you admission." His mother had made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite laughing and was both. His sister had said, obviously. He had sat with the letter in his hands for a moment. He had thought about 4 years of getting up early and staying late and the specific accumulated knowledge of someone who has spent 4 years doing exactly what they said they were going to do. He had thought about his coach and the 12 and under kids at the community center and his parents who had emigrated from Nigeria before he was born and who had made in every decision they made every day a specific deliberate investment in him. He had looked at the letter. He had thought, okay, now I have to not mess it up. He had not messed it up. He had not messed it up until the night of February 22nd, which was a Friday night, which was the night Officer Kevin Marsh decided that Darius Okafor was going to be what Marsh needed him to be. Officer Kevin Marsh was 32 years old. He had been with the Westmont Police Department for 8 years. He worked evening patrol in the district that included Harrington High School, the Westmont Community Center, and the commercial corridor on Delacroix Avenue. He had a record of 4 prior citizen complaints, 1 in his 2nd year, 1 in his 4th year, and 2 in his 6th year. All 4 had been reviewed internally. 3 had been classified as inconclusive and closed. The 4th from his 6th year had produced a written counseling note that had been removed from his active record after 12 months of satisfactory performance. He had learned across 8 years what the internal review process could absorb. He had also developed across 8 years of evening patrol a specific operational vocabulary for the stops he made in the Commercial Corridor Community Safety Initiative. Proactive contact observed behavior suggesting possible narcotics activity. He had learned that these phrases combined with the right documentation language could produce an arrest record that stood up at arraignment and moved through the system without generating the kind of scrutiny that required him to have been more careful than he had been. He had a partner, Officer Lewis Wren, who was 39 years old and had 11 years on the force, and who knew what Marsh did on evening patrol and had decided across the time they had worked together that knowing and not actively stopping were different things, and that the second was sufficient. He had made 7 arrests in the last 14 months using this methodology. 7 stops in the commercial corridor, 7 subjects who matched the profile he had built across 8 years of deciding what suspicious activity looked like in this neighborhood at this hour. 7 plastic bags in the compartment behind the driver's seat available for the stops that needed them. 7 incident reports, each using the same operational vocabulary, each constructed to stand up to the level of scrutiny that commercial corridor possession charges typically received. Of the 7, 6 had resulted in plea agreements at arraignment because the defendants could not afford the bail and could not afford to wait, and could not afford an attorney who would conduct the kind of thorough review of the evidence chain that would have found what was in the evidence chain to be found. Of the 6 plea agreements, 3 had involved charges that the defendants later said had no factual basis, and their public defenders agreed. But by the time they agreed, the plea was entered and the record was made, and the time to challenge it had a very narrow window that the public defenders' caseloads did not always allow them to reach. 1 of the 7 had gone to trial. The jury acquitted. The district attorney's office had not referred the case for investigation into the evidence chain. Marsh had received a note from his supervisor saying jury decisions happen. You did the job. He had not been disciplined. He had learned what the methodology could produce. He had also learned what it could not produce, which was what he was thinking about on the evening of February 22nd. He was thinking about his clearance rate and about how the department measured it, and about the specific number he needed to maintain to keep the assignment he had, and to be considered for the sergeant's examination in the fall. He was behind on the number he needed. He had been behind since October. He had been making stops in the corridor that had not produced arrests, and the stops that did not produce arrests did not go into the clearance calculation, and the clearance calculation was what the sergeant's examination committee was going to look at. He was thinking about these things when he turned onto Delacroix Avenue and saw at the corner of Delacroix and Morse Street a black teenager walking alone on the sidewalk. He had not yet identified the teenager as Darius Okafor. He had not identified him as an honor roll student or as the volunteer youth basketball coach at the community center, or as the young man who had received an early decision acceptance letter in November. He had identified him as the profile he was looking for, a black male teenager walking alone near the commercial corridor on a Friday evening. He made the stop before he identified anything else. He had made this calculation 13 times in 14 months, 14 times counting tonight. On the evening of February 22nd, he was driving his patrol car on Delacroix Avenue at 9:17 when he saw a black male teenager walking alone on the sidewalk near the corner of Delacroix and Morse Street. The teenager was Darius Okafor, who was 17 years old and was walking the 4 blocks between his cousin Marcus's house on Vine Street and the bus stop on Delacroix after spending 3 hours helping Marcus study for a chemistry test. Marcus was 15 and struggling with stoichiometry, which is the branch of chemistry that deals with the quantitative relationships between reactants and products in chemical reactions. It is a topic that requires a specific kind of thinking, methodical, precise, attentive to the relationship between quantities. Darius had explained it 3 times in 3 different ways until Marcus's face had shifted from confused to approximately not confused, which was the best you could usually achieve in a single session. He had said goodbye to Marcus at 9:05. He had walked out onto Vine Street into the February air, which was cold and clear and had the specific quality of late winter cold in Westmont. Not the deep cold of December, but the cold of a season that is not quite done and is not yet ready to be done. He had put his headphones in. He had started walking. He was wearing his school hoodie, which had Harrington High School printed across the front and his basketball team number on the sleeve. He had nothing in his pockets except his bus pass and a folded piece of paper with the stoichiometry problems they had been working on, which he had planned to put in the recycling when he got home. He was carrying his phone in his right hand. He was walking at his normal pace on the public sidewalk on the east side of Delacroix, moving south toward the bus stop at the corner of Delacroix and Grant. He had every right to be on this sidewalk. He had walked this route before. He was thinking about the stoichiometry and about whether Marcus was going to pass the exam and about the chemistry exam he himself had on Monday and about the basketball practice tomorrow morning and about the community center afterward. Marsh pulled his patrol car to the curb. He called Darius over. Darius took out one earbud. He walked to the car. He said good evening, officer, because his parents had taught him to say good evening and to be respectful in police encounters, and to present himself as clearly as possible from the first word, because his parents had grown up in a country where the relationship between citizens and state authority was something you navigated with deliberate care, and they had brought that understanding with them and passed it to their son as explicitly as they had passed him anything else. Marsh told him to step out of the way of the sidewalk. Darius stepped onto the grass at the edge of the sidewalk. Marsh got out of the car. He was in the language of his incident report, conducting a proactive contact with a subject whose behavior had suggested possible narcotics activity. In the language of what was actually happening, he had seen a black teenager walking alone near the commercial corridor on a Friday night, and had decided to stop him, the same decision he had made 7 times in 14 months, each time using the same calculation. He told Darius to put his hands out of his pockets. Darius said he did not have his hands in his pockets. He showed them phone in the right hand, nothing in the left. Marsh told him he was going to conduct a pat-down for officer safety. Darius said, "Am I being detained?" He had asked this because his mother had told him to ask this if he was ever stopped. He had asked his basketball coach the same question once, and his coach had answered it in detail. He knew that being detained meant he could not leave. He knew that the question created a record, and that the record mattered. Marsh said yes. He conducted the pat-down. The pat-down found nothing. Marsh told Darius to wait. Darius waited. He stood on the grass at the corner of Delacroix and Morse in the February night air at 9:22 with his phone and one earbud and his Harrington hoodie, and he waited. He thought about the chemistry test. He took out his phone to text his mother he was running late. Marsh said, "Put the phone away." Darius put the phone away. Marsh walked back to his patrol car. He opened the rear door on the driver's side. He reached into the storage compartment behind the driver's seat. He removed something small and placed it in his jacket pocket. He walked back to Darius. He said, "I need you to explain what this is." He was holding a small plastic bag. He said he had found it on the ground in the immediate vicinity of where Darius was standing. Darius looked at the bag. He looked at Marsh. He said, "That is not mine." He said it with the specific quality of a statement that is both obviously true and completely insufficient, which is one of the most difficult qualities any statement can have. He said it knowing it was true and knowing that the truth of it was not going to be the most important factor in what happened next. Marsh said, "I found it in your possession." Darius said, "No, you did not. I do not have anything on me. You patted me down and there was nothing." Marsh said, "I found it on the ground near you. This is sufficient for a possession charge." Darius said, "That is not mine and it was not near me. I was not near anything on the ground." Marsh said, "I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back." Darius looked at the bag. He looked at Marsh. He thought with the specific clarity that arrives in certain moments when everything around you is moving in a direction that is not the direction the truth points. This is not mine, and he knows it is not mine, and he is going to say it is mine anyway. He thought, "I am 17 years old, and I am standing on a sidewalk, and a police officer is holding a bag that is not mine, and I do not have the power right now to make him acknowledge that." He thought, "I need to be very careful." He thought, "I need to be careful in the way my parents have always told me to be careful, which is the way that keeps you safe even when safe costs something, even when safe means not saying the true thing as loudly as the true thing deserves to be said." He said, "That is not mine." He said it clearly and directly, and without anger in his voice, because anger in his voice was going to be used, and he was not going to give the situation anything it could use against him. Marsh said, "I found it on the ground near you. This is sufficient for a possession charge." Darius said, "No, you did not. I was not near anything on the ground. You conducted a pat-down and found nothing." Marsh said, "I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back." Darius thought, "There are things happening right now that I do not have the power to stop." He thought, "My mother is going to know about this tonight. She is going to receive a phone call that she has been afraid of receiving since before I knew there was something to be afraid of." He thought, "The acceptance letter is in the drawer in my bedroom." He thought, Saturday morning. He put his hands behind his back. He thought, "I did not do anything. I did not do anything, and it does not matter right now that I did not do anything. And I have to be careful because the thing that matters right now is that I get through this physically safely, and then let my mother handle the rest because she will handle it. Because she has been preparing to handle it since before I knew it might need handling, and she is better at this than I am." The handcuffs closed. They were cold. It was February, and the February air was cold, and the metal was colder still, and the specific quality of having your hands cuffed behind your back is something that you cannot fully understand until it happens to you, which is the way with many things. You can be warned about them, and you can prepare for them, and still when they arrive, they are what they are, and not what you imagined. He did not resist. He breathed. He thought about the 12 and under kids at the community center. He thought about Saturday morning, which was tomorrow morning, which was 11 hours from now. He thought about whether this was going to mean he could not be there, and he thought, yes, it probably means that. He thought Marcus Fulton is going to have to cover the program alone. He thought about the letter in the drawer. He thought about his father, who would receive a phone call tonight that his father had specifically told him he never wanted to receive. Not never wanted in the way of wanting to remain ignorant, never wanted in the way of wanting his son to never be the reason for such a call. He thought about his father at 30 in a country he had not grown up in, working 2 jobs while he studied for a professional certification examination, doing the specific accumulated daily work of building a life in a new place. He thought about what that had cost and what it had produced and what it was producing right now, which was a 17-year-old in handcuffs on the corner of Delacroix and Morse Street, who had a 3.9 grade point average and an early decision acceptance, and who was going to call his parents from a holding room before midnight. He thought, none of this is random. He thought, I need to pay attention to everything from this moment forward. He was placed in the patrol car. The interior smelled of plastic and the specific institutional scent of municipal vehicles. The seat was hard. His hands were behind him, and the position was uncomfortable in the specific way that a deliberately uncomfortable position is uncomfortable, not painful enough to distract from everything else that was happening, but present enough to remind him continuously of the state he was in. He looked at the window. He looked at the corner of Delacroix and Morse Street, at the sidewalk he had been walking on, at the grass, where he had been standing at the ordinary Friday night of a city going about its business around a 17-year-old who had been doing nothing wrong. He noticed the body cam on Marsh's vest. He noticed its indicator light. He noticed the light change when Marsh reached for his radio. He noticed it change again after the radio call when Marsh pressed something on the camera housing. He noticed the color of the light after Marsh pressed it, not the gray of fully off, but a faint amber that was different from the recording mode and different from off, and that he had not seen described in any context he could recall immediately, but that his attention registered as notable. He filed it. He was not sure why. He filed it the way you file things when you do not know if they matter, but you know enough to know that you should not throw them away. Marsh sat in the driver's seat. He reached for his radio. He called in the stop subject, detained suspected narcotics proceeding to process. He did not know that his body cam was still running. He had activated it when he first got out of the car, which was department policy. He had switched it to what he believed was off after the arrest was made. The camera on his model, the Axon Body 3, had 3 modes accessible by sequential button presses, from the full record mode video off, audio on, which was sometimes called restricted mode, and which was accessed by a single press, and the full off mode, which required a second press within 3 seconds of the first. The distinction was a safeguard. The video off, audio on mode was for officers who needed to discuss sensitive operational matters without visual documentation, but whose audio record was still required. The full off required the second press to prevent accidental total shutdown. Marsh had pressed once. He had believed, as he believed most Friday evenings, when he pressed the button after an arrest, that he had pressed twice. He had been pressing this button for 3 years. He had been pressing it once, and believing he had pressed it twice for 3 years. And across 3 years, nothing had generated a consequence that taught him otherwise. This was the first time the amber indicator light meant something. The camera was running audio. The camera was running audio when Marsh called his patrol partner, Officer Lewis Wren, on his personal cell phone at 9:44. It was running audio for the full 7-minute and 43-second conversation. It captured Marsh describing what he had done before calling Darius over to the spot on the ground. It captured him describing the subject as a nobody kid who wasn't going to have the resources to fight it. It captured Wren saying, "You sure about this kid?" Marsh saying he's nobody. Wren saying because the last one had a PD who actually asked questions. Marsh saying this kid's going to take the plea at arraignment like the rest of them. Wren saying all right. Make sure the report is clean. Marsh saying always is. 7 minutes and 43 seconds. In Darius Okafor's Harrington High School hoodie, in the back seat of the patrol car on the corner of Delacroix and Morse Street, a 17-year-old with a 3.9 grade point average and an early decision acceptance letter in his bedroom drawer, was watching the faint amber indicator light on the body cam and filing it. In the processing room at the department, Darius was photographed and fingerprinted and told to wait in a holding area. He was there for 1 hour and 40 minutes before he was allowed to call his parents. His mother arrived at the department at 11:51. His father arrived at 12:08, having driven 40 minutes from the birthday dinner of a colleague he had left without explanation because the call from his wife had been a specific kind of call that required him to be at the department and not at the dinner. They were told their son was being charged with possession of a controlled substance. His mother said, "My son does not use drugs." She said it with the specific tone of a statement that was not inviting disagreement, not because she was being confrontational, but because it was true, and she was stating a true thing in the way that true things are stated when you have been a parent for 17 years, and you know your child, and you know the difference between the look of someone who has been caught and the look of someone who has been wronged. The desk officer said, "The arresting officer found a controlled substance in the vicinity of your son's location." His mother said, "In the vicinity." She said it once. She let the phrase sit in the air for a moment. Then she said it again, quietly, as if she were examining it in the vicinity. She said, "I need to speak with a supervisor." A supervisor was summoned. He was a lieutenant who had been on the force for 22 years and who had managed the processing desk on enough Friday nights to recognize the specific quality of a parent who was not going to be moved by protocol. He confirmed the charge. He told them Darius would be released to their custody pending a hearing. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from the following Monday. 2 weeks from the following Monday was 8 days before the early decision acceptance required a formal enrollment deposit. His mother made this calculation in the time it took the supervisor to finish his sentence. She had known the deposit deadline since November. She had put it on her calendar. She had known in the abstract that anything could threaten it, and she had managed that knowledge by making sure everything her son did was the kind of thing that would not threaten it. She said nothing for a moment. She kept her expression steady. She was 44 years old, and she had been managing things with the specific steady competence of a woman who had spent 20 years in a country that was not the one she grew up in, building a life that did not come with a template. And she had learned across those 20 years that the moments that required steady competence were exactly the moments that punished the absence of it. She said, "I understand. We will comply with the hearing requirement. I want to understand the specific nature of the evidence against my son." The supervisor told her. She said, "In the vicinity means on the ground near him, not on his person." He said, "Correct," she said, and the pat-down found nothing. He said, "That is not in the record in front of me." She said, "It was a pat-down stop." The arresting officer conducted a pat-down. His record will show what the pat-down found. I am asking whether it found anything. The supervisor looked at the record. He said the pat-down found no items. She said, "Thank you." She kept her expression steady. She looked at her son. He was sitting in a plastic chair in the processing room in his Harrington High School hoodie, with the look of a person who has been through something that should not have happened to them and who is in the process of deciding what to do about it. She knew the difference between that look and the look of a person who has been through something they caused. She had been his mother for 17 years, and she knew every expression. He had every quality of his stillness and his movement and his voice, and this was the look of someone who had been wronged and who was deciding not to let it destroy him. She said, "We are going to fix this." She said it in the voice she used when she had made a decision, not a promise, but a statement of what was happening next. He looked at her. He thought she has been preparing for the category of this. Not this exactly, but the category. She has been preparing for this since before he knew there was something to prepare for. She said quietly, "We are going to fix this." He said, "Mom, I need to tell you something first. There's an indicator light on the Bodycam he was wearing. The camera has different modes. When the officer pressed the button after the arrest, the indicator went amber, not gray. Gray is fully off. Amber is an intermediate mode. I think the camera was still recording audio." She was very still. She said, "How do you know what amber versus gray means on that model?" He said, "I read an article about Bodycam modes last year. I was curious about how they worked. I remember the indicator states. I was paying attention to the light because I thought it might matter." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "That might be the most important thing you have told me tonight." She said, "Tell me everything you remember about what you saw." The model of the camera. The sequence of button presses the exact quality of the light, and what happened in the car after, he told her. He told her in the sequential, precise way his father had taught him to describe mechanical observations, what he saw, in what order, at what point, with what degree of certainty. She took out her phone. She called their attorney. The attorney's name was Renee Holloway. She was 41 years old. She had been practicing criminal defense in Westmont County for 12 years. She had built her practice specifically around the kinds of cases that required technical and procedural precision cases where the evidence chain was the story, and where the people who controlled the narrative had every institutional advantage. She had taken the Okafor family's call at 12:23 in the morning and had not hesitated. She had told them she would be at the department in 20 minutes. She had been there in 17. When Darius told her about the body cam light, she was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said to his mother, "Do not let him say another word about this to anyone here. I'm going to handle the discovery." Renee filed an immediate discovery request for all body cam footage from the stop. She filed it at the arraignment as a condition of any plea negotiation. She filed it again in writing to the department's legal counsel the following morning with a specific notation device: mode logs indicator, state sequence, and all audio recording files, including restricted mode recordings from the period following arrest. She had been practicing criminal defense for 12 years. She had never before had a client who could describe the indicator state of the arresting officer's body cam. She had also never before had a recording that contained what this one contained. The department's legal counsel reviewed the request. They reviewed the camera's log. The log was an automated record of the camera's mode changes by timestamp. The log showed full record mode initiated at 9:21 p.m. when Marsh exited his vehicle. Mode change to video off, audio on at 9:36 p.m., which was 14 seconds after the arrest was made and Darius was placed in the patrol car. No second mode change recorded. Camera returned to standby at 10:03 p.m. when Marsh plugged it into the vehicle charging dock at the department. 7 minutes and 43 seconds of audio on recording between 9:36 and 9:44. They found the recording. The legal counsel's office had 3 attorneys on call for after-hours discovery requests. 2 of them listened to the recording together. The first said at the end of it, "This is not a difficult question." The second said, "We need to call the DA's office tonight." They called at 2:47 in the afternoon on the day after the arrest, after spending the morning reviewing the recording, again, reviewing the incident report, and verifying that the call log from Marsh's personal phone confirmed a call to Lewis Wren at 9:44 on February 22nd. That was 7 minutes and 41 seconds in duration. The incident report described the stop as proactive contact with a subject exhibiting behavior consistent with possible narcotics activity. Suspected controlled substance located in the immediate vicinity of the subject. Subject taken into custody. The audio recording did not describe it that way. The district attorney's office listened to the recording. They called Renee Holloway at 3:12. The district attorney's office dropped all charges against Darius Leon Okafor within 72 hours of the arrest. All charges dropped, expunged, no record. The enrollment deposit deadline for Whitmore University was still 6 days away. The department opened an internal investigation. They had no choice but to open one. The recording existed. It had been retrieved through lawful discovery. It was now in the possession of the district attorney's office and the defense attorney and the department's own legal counsel. The department's chief of police was told about it on the morning after the arrest. He listened to it once. He called the internal affairs commander at 8:40 in the morning. The investigation produced the audio recording the call log from Marsh's personal phone confirming the conversation with Wren. The pat-down report showing no items found on Darius's person, the Bodycam mode log showing the amber indicator period, and a comparison between Marsh's written incident report and the audio of his conversation with Wren, which were in irreconcilable conflict on every factual point that mattered. The investigation also produced something that had not been in the original discovery request, but that the investigation found when it began looking at Marsh's 8-year record with this new framework: a pattern in the commercial corridor stops. Not 7 arrests in 14 months, but 14 stops in 14 months that had begun as the same kind of proactive contact of which 7 had produced arrests and 7 had produced nothing beyond the stop itself. The 7 that had produced nothing had not produced incident reports. The 7 that had produced arrests had produced incident reports that all used the same operational vocabulary. Pattern designation was entered before the investigation was 5 days old. Marsh was placed on administrative leave the morning after the recording was retrieved. Wren was placed on administrative leave that afternoon. The investigation was transferred to the county's Independent Oversight Board at the request of the district attorney's office, which wanted the findings reviewed by an independent body before it determined what charges to recommend. The Oversight Board had been established in 2019 following a different misconduct case and had jurisdiction over investigations where criminal charges against officers were a possible outcome. The Oversight Board's investigation took 41 days. Its findings were extensive. Officer Kevin Marsh had fabricated evidence, filed a false incident report, and conducted a stop without lawful basis. He had done this at a minimum 7 times in 14 months using the same methodology. The 3 prior complaints classified as inconclusive were reopened and examined against the new evidence base. All 3, upon re-examination, were reclassified as substantiated. Officer Lewis Wren had been informed of the fabrication during or immediately after its commission and had counseled its concealment. The investigation examined whether Wren had knowledge of the prior 7 stops. The evidence suggested he had knowledge of at least 3. He had not reported any of them. The Oversight Board's recommendation termination of both officers, referral to the county district attorney for criminal charges, and notification to the 6 defendants who had entered plea agreements for charges that the current investigation indicated had no factual basis. 6 families were notified. The notification came from the district attorney's office. It was a formal letter, and it was accompanied by a phone call from an investigator who had been assigned to coordinate the follow-up with each of the 6 defendants. The investigator's name was Tamara Jenkins, and she had been with the DA's office for 9 years, and she described the calls later as the hardest part of the job she had done in 9 years. Not because the calls went badly, because of what it meant that the calls were necessary at all. 3 of the 6 had already known and had known for months or years that the charges against them had no factual basis. They had said so to their public defenders. Their public defenders had agreed. The plea agreements had been entered anyway because the defendants could not make bail and could not wait. And the public defenders had caseloads that did not allow for the kind of investigation that would have found the indicator light on the Bodycam. The 3 who had known looked at the letter and thought, "We have been waiting for this. We have known this for months or years, and we have been waiting for someone to also know it and write it down." 3 of the 6 had not known the full extent of what had happened to them. They had suspected. They had said to their families that something had not been right. But suspicion and knowledge are different things, and the letter from the DA's office was the knowledge. All 6 plea agreements were reviewed by the district attorney's office. All 6 were vacated. All 6 records were expunged. The 6 families received written confirmation that the records had been expunged and that no copy of the original charge would be maintained in any accessible database. The written confirmation was 3 paragraphs. 3 of the 6 families framed the letters. Tamara Jenkins kept a copy of all 6 case files in a folder on her desk for the remainder of the investigation. She said she kept them there because she needed to see them when she was writing. The district attorney's office filed charges against Marsh fabrication of evidence, filing a false official report, and civil rights violation under state law. The charges against Wren accessory to fabrication of evidence and failure to report misconduct. Both officers were terminated from the Westmont Police Department before the criminal charges were formally filed. The criminal proceedings took 11 months. Marsh pled guilty to the fabrication of evidence and false report charges. He received 18 months probation permanent decertification as a law enforcement officer in the state of Georgia and a criminal record that he would carry for the rest of his professional life. The civil rights violation charge was resolved through a plea agreement that included a formal judicial acknowledgement of the violation, which was a specific legal instrument that created a permanent record of the finding, regardless of how the case was characterized elsewhere. Wren pled no contest to the accessory charge. He received 12 months probation and decertification. Darius Okafor was at the community center the following Saturday morning. He had not known until the charges were dropped on Monday afternoon whether he would be. He had spent Saturday and Sunday at home while the investigation was in its first hours, doing the work he had available to him, which was his schoolwork and his thinking and the specific interior work of a person who has been through something that should not have happened to them and who is deciding what they are going to do about it. He had decided he was going to keep showing up. The charges were dropped. The enrollment deposit was submitted Tuesday. He was going to Whitmore University in the fall. He was at the community center the following Saturday at 8 a.m. He was wearing his Harrington High School hoodie, the same one he had been wearing on February 22nd because it was his hoodie, and he was not going to stop wearing it because of what had happened. He ran the 12 and under program the way he always ran it, giving specific attention to each child, moving through the drills with the patient efficiency of someone who had thought carefully about what these children needed to learn and how they needed to learn it. The pick and roll drill, the defensive positioning drill, the pass and move drill that the 12 and unders consistently found the most difficult because it required them to think about where they were going before they got there, which was a discipline that 11 and 12-year-olds were still developing. He ran the program for 2 hours. He was focused. He was present. He was teaching, which was the thing he knew how to do, and the thing he was going to keep doing, and the thing that had nothing to do with what had happened on February 22nd, except that February 22nd had confirmed with a clarity that a less extreme experience might not have produced why the doing of it mattered. After the session, Marcus Fulton asked if he had a minute. Darius said yes. They sat on the bleachers in the empty gym. Marcus was 61 years old and had been running the community center for 16 years. He had seen a great deal happen to people in this community across those 16 years, and had learned from watching that the people who came through the most difficult things were not always the strongest people or the smartest people or the people with the most resources. They were often the people who had a clear enough sense of what they were doing and why they were doing it, that the thing that happened to them did not displace the doing. He looked at Darius. He said, "I want to tell you something. What happened on February 22nd was not your fault and is not a reflection of who you are or what you are going to do with your life. I need you to hear that from me, because I have been in this gym with you every Saturday for 1.5 years, and I know what you are building here, and I want you to know that I know it, and that what happened cannot take it away." He said, "And I want to tell you something else. Every kid in this gym this morning saw you show up. And what they learned from seeing you show up was Coach D keeps showing up. That is what they learned. Not that nothing happened. Not that it was okay, that you keep showing up." He said that is the lesson they needed. Darius was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the court. The gym was quiet after 2 hours of the 12 and unders. The sound of sneakers on the floor had stopped, and the gym had the particular quiet that follows noise present resonant. He said, "I'm going to keep showing up." He said it the way he said things he meant as a statement of fact, not a performance of resolution, not a declaration. A statement of what was happening next, the same tone his mother used when she said, "We are going to fix this." Marcus said, "I know you are. I was not telling you for your benefit. I was telling you because I wanted you to know that I see it." He paused. He said, "And because you are going to university in the fall, and someone should say it to you before you go, the most important thing you are building is not a skill set or a credential. It is the habit. The thing that makes you Coach D to these kids is not that you can run a pick and roll drill. It is that you come back every Saturday, regardless. That is what they are going to remember you taught them." Darius was quiet again. Then he said, "That is the thing my father does. That is all he has ever done. He just comes back." Marcus nodded. They sat on the bleachers for another minute in the quiet gym. Then Darius said, "I need to go study for a chemistry exam." Marcus said, "Go." He went. He drove home. He found his father in the kitchen. His father was making tea. He made tea on Saturday mornings the way certain people make tea without variation in a specific sequence, with the particular care of someone for whom the sequence is part of what the tea is. A kettle, a specific ceramic pot, 2 tea bags, not 1, 5 minutes, not 4. His father's name was Emeka Okafor. He was 51 years old. He had emigrated from Nigeria in 1996 with a master's degree in electrical engineering and a specific plan for what he was going to do when he arrived, which was to pass the American Professional Certification Examination and build a career in his field. He had worked 2 jobs in the first 3 years, one in a factory assembly operation and one doing computer data entry on the overnight shift at a logistics company. He had studied for the certification examination in the hours between the two jobs and on the weekends. He had passed it on his second attempt. He had built a career. He had married. He had built a family and a house in Westmont and had lived in this house for 19 years, and he had done all of this with the specific, consistent, unshowy quality of someone who understood that the work was the thing, and that the recognition would come or it would not, and the work was going to happen either way. He had also done it with the understanding that the work was not just for himself. The work was a foundation. The work was the thing you build so that your children have something to stand on. He was standing at the counter making tea when Darius came through the door. He said without looking up, "How are the kids today?" He had asked this every Saturday for a year and a half. He would ask it every Saturday for as long as Darius was running the program. It was one of the ways he kept track of what his son was building, which was one of his responsibilities as a parent, knowing what your child is building so that you can see it clearly and tell them you see it. Darius said, "Good. We worked on the pick and roll drill. They ran it correctly about 60% of the time, which is better than last week." His father said, "That sounds like progress." Darius said it is. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the counter. They were quiet for a moment. The kettle was still on. The kitchen smelled of the tea and of the Saturday morning that had been happening in this kitchen for 19 years. The particular Saturday morning smell of a house where people were going about their lives in the specific habitual way that makes a place feel like home. Darius said, "Dad, can I ask you something?" His father said yes. Darius said, "When you came to this country and you were working the two jobs and studying for the exam, did you ever feel like it wasn't going to work?" His father was quiet for a moment. He poured the water into the pot. He said, "Yes, several times. There were mornings when I thought the examination was not something I was going to pass. There were mornings when I thought I had chosen wrong and that I should have stayed." He said, "What did you do on those mornings?" His father said, "I went to work, and then I came home, and then I studied, and then I slept and got up and went back." He said, "Not because I was certain it would work, because those were the things that were mine to do. I could control what I did with the hours I had. I could not control whether it was going to be enough. So I did what I could control and let the rest be what it was going to be." He said, "That is the only answer I have ever had." Darius was quiet. His father said, "Why are you asking?" Darius said, "I was talking to Marcus this morning. He said something about the habit, about showing up being the lesson." His father nodded slowly. He said, "Marcus is correct." He set a cup of tea in front of Darius. He said, "You have an exam Monday." Darius said, "Chemistry." His father said, "Go study." Darius picked up the cup. He carried it to his room. He set it on the desk beside the chemistry textbook. He thought about the acceptance letter in the drawer. He thought about February 22nd and what it had felt like, the handcuffs, the back of the patrol car, the corner of Delacroix and Moore Street, through the window, the amber indicator light. He thought about what the recording had meant and what it had cost Marsh, who had 8 years of service and a methodology and a clearance rate he was trying to maintain, and who had used that methodology on 7 people before it reached someone whose mother drove to the gym in November to hand him an envelope rather than leave it at home for him to open alone, and then paid attention at 12:23 in the morning in a police department processing room to what her son described about the indicator state on an Axon Body 3 Bodycam. He thought the indicator light. He thought, "I noticed it because I pay attention to how things work. I noticed it because my father is an engineer and I grew up in a house where understanding how things work was not optional." He thought the indicator light is the reason I am sitting at this desk right now. He thought about all the people who had come before him who had not had an indicator light, who had not had a mother with the specific preparation and presence of mind to sit in a holding room at midnight and receive her son's description of an indicator state and understand immediately what it might mean, who had not had a Renee Holloway who arrived in 17 minutes and had 12 years of experience with the specific kind of case where the evidence chain is the story. He thought about the 6 people who had taken plea agreements. He thought about what their February 22nds had been like, the same corner, the same patrol car, the same incident report, language, a public defender's caseload that did not allow for the depth of investigation that would have found what there was to find. He thought about 3 of them who had told their public defenders that the charges had no factual basis and who had been believed and whose belief had not been enough to change what happened. He thought about what it meant that 6 plea agreements were now vacated, that 6 records were now expunged, not because of what he had done exactly, because of what the recording had existed and what the recording had made possible, a chain of events that started with an amber indicator light and ran through a 17-year-old's attention to detail and his mother's presence of mind and an attorney who knew exactly what to file and a legal counsel that knew exactly what they had when they found it. He was quiet for a long time. He opened the chemistry textbook. He studied until 10 in the evening. He ate dinner with his parents. He was quiet at dinner, not with the quiet of someone processing difficulty, but with the quiet of someone who has finished processing something and has arrived at the other side of it and is now just eating dinner with their parents on a Saturday night. His mother said at one point, "How are you?" He said, "I am good, Mom." He said it the way you say things that are simply true. She looked at him for a moment. She said, "I know." She said it the way she said things she meant without elaboration. He went to bed. He slept. He had the chemistry exam Monday morning, and he was going to be ready for it. He took the exam Monday morning. He had studied Sunday evening and Monday morning, and he was ready for it. He arrived at school at 7:45, 15 minutes before the first bell, and sat in the common area with his notes and reviewed them for 20 minutes. He was not anxious. He had done the work, and the work was done, and the exam was going to reflect the work, and the result was going to be what the work deserved. And he had done enough of the work to deserve the result he wanted. He sat in the 3rd row, 4th seat desk he always sat in, and he worked through the exam with the methodical precision he brought to everything he studied, and he checked his answers twice, and he handed it in with 6 minutes remaining. He received a 91. His chemistry teacher, whose name was Mrs. Aldridge, and who had taught at Harrington for 14 years, and who knew what had happened on February 22nd, because she had seen it on the local news, and because Darius had come to her door Monday morning before first period and said he was fine, and she had believed him because she knew him noted the grade in her ledger and said nothing to him about it directly. She understood that what the grade communicated was already said, and that the saying did not require her assistance. He was going to Whitmore University in the fall. He was going to study what he intended to study and build what he intended to build and come back in whatever form that took to this community that had produced him. He was going to coach kids on Saturday mornings for as long as Saturday mornings were available to him. He was going to keep showing up. The indicator light had been on. He had noticed. He had told his mother. His mother had called Renee Holloway. The recording existed, and because the recording existed, the thing that was supposed to be done to him was not done to him, and Marsh's methodology ended at the 7th arrest instead of the 8th, and the people from the prior stops were not the only ones who knew the truth, and the record that existed now was not the one that was supposed to exist, but the one that was true. There is a specific kind of work that looks like paying attention. It does not announce itself. It does not require special tools or special resources. It requires only the habit built carefully over years of noticing how things work and storing what you notice and trusting that what you notice is worth keeping. It is the kind of work that 17-year-olds whose fathers are engineers learn to do without being told to learn it. It is the kind of work that looks unremarkable until the moment when it is the only thing that matters. It is also the kind of work that the people who designed Officer Marsh's methodology relied on not happening. The methodology worked across 7 stops because the people being stopped did not have what Darius Okafor had in the backseat of that patrol car. Not a resource or a credential or a connection, but a habit of noticing a mother prepared to receive what he noticed and an attorney who knew exactly what to do with it when she got there in 17 minutes. Renee Holloway said in an interview with the county newspaper 3 months after the charges were dropped, "I have practiced criminal defense for 12 years. I have handled Bodycam disputes before. This is the first case where my client from the back of a police vehicle on the night of his arrest was able to give me a technically accurate description of the camera's indicator state that told me exactly where to look. That is not something that happens in most cases. The outcome of most cases depends on what resources people have. This case depended on what one 17-year-old had decided to pay attention to. She said, "That is not a reason to be satisfied with the outcome. It is a reason to be honest about how rare it is." Darius read the interview a week after it ran. He read it at the kitchen table with his coffee because he had started drinking coffee in March, which was something his mother considered a sign of impending adulthood. He thought about what Renee had said. He thought she is right. This is not a reason to be satisfied. He thought this is a reason to keep going. He had decided on February 22nd what he was going to work toward when he graduated and came back to this community. He had not named it precisely that night. He had named it across the following weeks in the conversations with his parents and with Marcus Fulton, and in the hours he spent studying for the chemistry exam that he was going to take regardless of what had happened. What he had named was systems, not a single case, not a single outcome. The systems that produced 14 stops in 14 months in a commercial corridor, and 7 plea agreements, and the gap between amber and gray that had never in 3 years generated a consequence until it did. He was going to study that. He was going to come back. He was going to keep showing up. That is what it looked like on February 22nd. That is what it produced. If this story moved you, subscribe our channel. We tell the stories of people who noticed the indicator light when it mattered most, and who told someone and what happened because they did.